Well, good morning and welcome everyone to this webinar about how to spend smarter. Welcome back to those who are with us for our first webinar on value, and a very warm welcome to those who are joining us for the first time. Today is the next in our series of webinars, and we're delighted you can join us, and we hope that the next hour will inform, engage, and challenge your thinking around spend. Well, it's true, in the past year, many companies and organizations have been challenged how to survive the pandemic, and often the spotlight is firmly on the spend part of the equation. So today, we're going to work through some ideas and influences around spend, and our panel of experts from finance, procurement, and strategy will unpack some of these ideas we have to share. My name is Cass Burgess, and I'd like to start by introducing your hosts from the Kinetic Finance and Procurement team who will lead this webinar. Our panelists are David Smith, Charlotte Christensen, and Federico Urso, who are all finance experts, and Eric Danjou-Dichon, who brings his wealth of experience in procurement to this forum today. And finally, a special welcome to the founder and CEO of Kinetic, Will Hogg, who will help us unpack a strategic tool that we could use to challenge our thinking around spend. It's something that's very practical and easily adapted to any level in any organization. We're going to use Zoom, the Zoom chat function, for your questions. So please drop your questions into the chat as we go, and I'll facilitate that by asking one of our panelists to respond. And we'll also have some time at the end of this session for a more formal Q&A, and we are, of course, available to discuss any of the points that come out of today's discussions in more detail after the webinar. To gather your opinion at various points during the discussion, we'll host Zoom polls. And again, we'll ask our panel of experts to provide commentary on the responses that we receive. Please note that this webinar is being recorded, and the playback will be made available shortly after the session has ended. And just after the webinar, we'll also send out a brief recap of our spend model, which is designed for you to share broadly within your organizations and to stimulate conversation within your teams. David, to begin proceedings, can you give us some insight on the journey you're taking us on in the next hour so that we have some context for our point of departure, please?
Thank you, Cass, and good morning, everyone. So the purpose of this webinar is really to continue that journey that we started in the first webinar around challenging your perceptions on value and how to drive value. And really today, what we're going to jump into is how to spend smarter and to challenge your perceptions on how to spend smarter. And our objective today, though, is for you to think and act differently from today, coming out of this webinar, and to provide you a framework to do this.
Thank you, David. That's a great foundation. Where are we headed next?
So firstly, a quick recap on what we talked in the first webinar for those who are there and those that aren't. We used the 4-box change modelers as a framework, and really having this all in place enables you to drive successful change. So let me just take you through that one by one. Firstly, you need the pressure for change, the case for change. Why are you doing something? And what do you need to change? Then after that, you need a clear shared vision, which is clear to the whole organization. You then need a feasible plan to get there. And finally, but not by any means least, you need the capabilities to deliver. And this is often where companies struggle and one of the most critical elements. So you need all of these 4 elements in place to drive successful change. Then, as we walk that forward into the first webinar, how do we structure that? So taking that pressure for change, VUCA, you'll see there we've got an extra C for crisis. We all now live in this VUCA world. This is the new normal, and the good old days, should I say, of some ideas of stability will not revert. So this is the world we live in and the case for change. Then, but what is the vision? A vision, and this is really critical, of sustainable and inclusive value creation. Sustainable, so it's durable, it's beyond the short term, and inclusive, you really take into account all of your stakeholder needs. Of course, you still need to deliver for your shareholders, but in a much broader way. And then what does the plan look like? Really 3 elements to the plan: people, partners, and innovation. People, make sure you harness your people within your organization and external to your organization. Partners, not just your traditional partners, be they those suppliers or customers. Think more broadly about your stakeholders. How do you go beyond just pure relationships? Help them to help you with your vision. And then innovation, and really innovation is about innovation in everything you do. And then finally, the capability to deliver. Really 3 key levers there: buy smarter, operate smarter, and spend smarter, which is where we're going to focus today.
Thank you, David. That's really helpful. We have a nice, solid foundation, a bit of context where we've come from, why we're here today, and some idea of where we're headed over the next hour. Before stepping up to challenge our thinking on the spend piece, I think it's a good idea to take a temperature check from our participants this morning, and we're going to launch our first poll. So we have a question for you, please. In your organization, do you believe active spend management can influence and help drive sustainable and inclusive total shareholder returns? Please vote now. Poll is still in progress. We'll give it just a few more seconds. Right, our poll is closed. Thank you very much for voting. The answers have come back. Yes, strong yes here. The ayes have it. I always wanted to say that. Ayes to the right. 84% of people do believe active spend management can influence and help drive sustainable and total shareholder returns. David, what do you make of that?
I think that's actually very good news, very positive, that that really driving spend management, which is spend smarter, where we're going to spend our time today, really can have that influence beyond just, should I say, that pure profit. So in a much broader sense. So I think that's very, there's a few there that are not sure or a little bit, so hopefully we'll be able to win those over.
Super, thank you.
So why are we actually talking about spend smarter? And it's really about immediate value generation. So the first question we ask ourselves is, what should we spend? Firstly, we need to identify our spend, understand our spend, understand those key cost drivers, and then make choices, both at the strategic level and at the operational level. But beyond that, we need actually to be smarter about it. How do we maximize value? That's really the next question, and think differently about it. Generally, we think of spend as costs that we can manage, costs that we can cut, often the case, or add a little bit to. We would encourage you to think about costs, much spend about like investments that you can grow and that you really want to get a return from. So that's really why we're focusing on spend smarter today. And then after that, once you've really defined what you're going to spend, you can optimize that through buy smarter and operate smarter, which we will discuss in future webinars.
Okay, wonderful, David, thank you. So I'm hearing a lot about identifying what we spend first, start with the what, and then move into the how, think about changing the way we look at the spend piece. And I guess a lot of this comes about because given this VUCA picture, this new normal picture that you painted for us, we definitely need greater visibility on spend. We need something that helps us into a more streamlined, a simpler process so that we can make those decisions around spend much quicker, given this dynamism that we have in our new normal today. So if we're starting on spend and it's all about challenge the way we think and consequently the way we act, we need a new tool to do this. And we thought something to introduce at this point would be the OODA loop. And we're going to turn to Will Hogg. Will, can you help us unpack OODA, please, and what it might mean in the context of spend?
Yeah, thank you, Cass, and good morning, everybody. So as Cass said, the idea here is to bring a bit of a strategic framework to the discussion. And having worked with 70 companies over the last 13 years, I can confidently say that whichever business you're in, whichever industry you're in, whichever area you're discussing, and today, of course, is spend smarter, if you execute a mediocre strategy well, it will always outperform the perfect strategy that is not executed. If I say it differently or more simply, if you have a spend strategy and you don't execute it or adapt it as you go, then of course it's just words on a piece of paper. We know this, all of us know this, whatever strategy or plan we're talking about, yet most of us have issues getting our spending plans executed, or at minimum adapted as fast and effectively as possible, particularly, and to go back to what David said, in this VUCA, so extra crisis world. Now, this problem of execution was literally a matter of life or death for a fighter pilot called John Boyd. He was actually called 42nd Boyd because he could win against any opponent in less than 40 seconds. Now, luckily for us in this discussion, well, first, luckily for him, but for us in this discussion, he used that expertise to answer the question, how do individuals, how do organizations, how do businesses win in an uncertain environment? And his answer was the OODA loop that you see on the slide, OODA. So first, O is the observe. How is your team and your business performing today? Second, O is orient. So how does your performance in spend, for example, compare to others? For example, in benchmarking, in and out of the company. Decide, once you have that data, what can you do to improve performance? And last, act. What can you do now to make that difference happen? That's what we're focusing on. The point being that the winner in any context, in any strategic context, the winner is the person who can do the OODA loop, the loop you see in front of you, with higher speed and more quality than their competitor. Therefore, it's all about speed and discipline, starting with you and your team. To bring this to life very quickly, a good example is Sony. Sony, as you may know, they promised after losing the VHS and Betamax video cassette war at the end of the 1980s, that they would never, ever again have a superior product and lose. So they did their OODA loop. And where they are today is, again, you may know, is that their PlayStation consoles have consistently outperformed Microsoft's product, the Xbox. And Sony have focused, because what they've done there is they focused their marketing spend on gaming experience by having better games on their platform rather than just technology. A huge bet on their part. And they've moved from being for the players to their tagline of play has no limits. Let's look at the result. They're predicted to sell nearly twice as many consoles per year as at Microsoft's Xbox by 2024. Why am I sharing this with you? Because, of course, this approach, this thinking doesn't just apply to Sony. Many leading businesses have found that using OODA enables individuals, teams, and ultimately business to learn and adapt so that they can keep up with and then stay ahead of a fast-changing world.
Well, that's really helpful. Thank you. I have to do something in order to think and act differently, but do it in a way that brings about an element of speed, and I have to do it with a measure of discipline to get a desired outcome. That's really great. We're going to start unpacking the different elements of OODA in the context of spend and what that might mean in our organizations. So thank you very much for sharing that piece with us. And I know that with the first piece of OODA, the observe, we're going to have to think differently about what we observe and how we do it. And I know, Charlotte, this is a subject very, very dear to your heart. But perhaps we'll just pause and check in with our audience for a moment. And this time we're going to ask you to use the chat box for your feedback and commentary. In your organization, what information do you take into account before a spend decision is made? What information do you take into account before a spend decision is made? If you'd like to share your thoughts with us in the chat box now, and we'll ask our team to comment in just a moment. Thank you. So a couple of answers starting to come through. One participant has said a return on investment is at the forefront. budget, anything around budget is important, what options we have, what alternatives we have, background market information, financials, I presume the numbers that pack out into that spend decision. We have another offering that I have to think about whether this spend is required, will it add value, what do I expect it to deliver, how can I maximize this? Some decisions are based on historical spend, performance KPIs, what we spend currently for the same service, do we use this service in full? We're looking at benchmarks. If the short-term ROI is positive, there's no budget. And perhaps a final offering here for us to challenge our thinking is that we have information that quantifies the opportunity and the expected impact of investment. So there's quite a lot to unpack there, but certainly it's a fairly wide range of pieces of information, of factors that come into play. Charlotte, help us unpack this thinking about observing information ahead of spend decisions, please.
Thank you very much, Cass, and good morning, everyone. Yes, as we already see some of you saying, to spend smarter, you have to observe and take into consideration all the new information in a changing environment. We have to observe with an open mindset, and we have to be able to gain the knowledge and the understanding that is crucial to later on orient, decide, and act. To create sustainable and inclusive value, you cannot longer only focus on the dollar spent or the financial performance. You also have to search information of how your spend decision will impact the planet and the people. You have to collect all this relevant information for all the 3 dimensions to get the full visibility. So just last week, the European Parliament voted to request that companies by law conduct environmental and human rights due diligences along the full value chain. And this is a clear statement that we have to think triple bottom line. So what does that really mean when you observe with a triple bottom line mindset? Let's take an example, office spaces. In the old days, you would collect information about the price per square meter, the payment terms, the lease terms, and you would base your investment decision on the financial implication. This information is, of course, still very relevant, but not longer sufficient. Today, you need to collect the information about how this spend decision will impact the planet. So with our example with leases, premises, is this premises considered as a green lease? Is it benefiting from energy and water efficiency investments? As an example here, MasterCard has incorporated sustainability questions already into the RFQs when they look at new premises. And last but not least, you have to collect the information about the social performance. How will your spend impact the people, your employees, your possibility to recruit talents in the future? Will there be an impact on customer and supplier relationships? And how will it impact the society? So to create this foundation and the visibility before you move on to orient, you need to make sure that you have observed and captured all the relevant information of how this spend decision would impact the profit, the people, and the planet. And this is a new way of thinking. And this new mindset forces us to build up some new capabilities. We have to understand what data is really relevant to observe. And we have to be able to filter what data is relevant for this and accurate for this spend decision. So let's think about our organization for a moment. There are research that shows that diverse and inclusive companies are 60% more likely to outperform peers when it comes to decision making. And this is explained by the fact that diverse and inclusive teams focus more on the facts because they more closely scrutinize each other's actions. They also process the facts more carefully. And to add on to this, studies shows that companies with more diverse management teams have 19% higher revenues and therefore better financial performance. And that's because they are more innovative. They encourage the people, the teams, to look at problems in a different way. So conclusion, having a diverse and inclusive organization could help and speed up this transformational journey, which is critical when you observe with a triple bottom line mindset.
Thank you, Charlotte. There's a lot in there, and we're hearing that we really need to observe more things, different things, and take in a bigger package of information at the outset if we're starting to think and act differently in the area of spend. And just to feedback that we have one of our participants who's just dropped into the chat that the approach of this thinking about the triple bottom line and filtering all those bits of information, that really resonates with them. So thank you for that piece of feedback. And it's certainly something that fits into what you've been saying. Thank you, Charlotte. But I've got to take in all this data and I've got to do something different with it in terms of how I process, how I analyze, how I filter. Fede, help us understand what we do next that's different.
Yes, thank you, Cass. So, but before we get into the orient piece, let's take a step back and let's look at reality, how it used to be. So up until recently, we had our company view with its market-oriented strategy made to drive profitability on one side. And then on the other side, we had sustainability with people, planet, ESG, etc. They were both part of the same entity of the same company, but sometimes it felt almost like there were two different elements within the same company. Nowadays, like Charlotte mentioned, we have to observe differently. We have to do it through a different lens, the triple bottom line lens. And this is like looking through a prism, okay? So where light gets in and it goes out as a rainbow. And our rainbow today is a company where we have a single and unique strategy with the triple bottom line elements into it that then enables us to operate better, to orient, analyze, and get insights from the new reality in a different way. So let's look at how it looks like in reality, how companies are actually doing it. So as I mentioned, everything starts from strategy. We have to go beyond financial performance. And this is what L'Oréal is doing with its L'Oréal for the Future strategy. It's a strategy that really integrates all the elements of the triple bottom line. Not only they communicate and deploy the strategy internally, but they also commit and communicate the strategy externally to investors and stakeholders. Once the strategic piece is done, you have to translate those strategic objectives into operational targets. And to give you another example, this is what Unilever is doing. They are deploying their specific targets for each of the triple bottom line elements throughout the organization. They commit to the targets, they track them, and they measure their performance against those targets. But that's not enough, because you might still end up in a situation where you have financial targets on one side, sustainability targets on the other side. So still, you might end up in the situation where they are sort of separate elements. So what is really important is then that everything is brought to life in your day-to-day work life. And this is, for example, what Mars is doing. They modified their criteria to make capital investment analysis, and they extended the time horizon and decreased the profitability threshold for projects that include a better use of natural resources, really to reflect in their day-to-day analysis and insights these new triple bottom line realities. Now, let me be 100% clear, because at the end of the day, as you said at the beginning, I'm here representing finance. So it's not all about people and planet. Profit is still a key element in the equation. And you might have heard in the news last week, and actually there was a piece of an article even today about how the CEO of Danone got removed from office because he put too much emphasis on people and planet at the expense of profit. So really looking reality through the triple bottom line lens and analyzing reality and getting insights out of this new reality requires a balancing act between people, planet, and profit.
Thank Thanks, Fede. It actually sounds like quite a delicate balancing act. I've got to bring this integrated thinking, and I've got to keep each of these elements in a reasonable proportion if I'm going to target this triple bottom line amid this backdrop of the VUCA with the 2C. So I have quite a job on my hand as I'm taking in everything, analyzing and filtering everything, and then starting to inch towards the action piece. What do I decide and what do I then do? So I love the picture of the lens. It really gives us a different way of thinking about what we do with all of this data and how we move forward. Let's check in with our participants at this point. Let's hear from our audience, please. We have another question for you to respond in the chat. In your organization, how has your decision-making changed in the last year? The last year, of course, very critical for so many of us in our organizations. What looks different? Do share your thoughts, feedback, comment in the chat box now, please. While we're waiting for some of those comments to come in, Will, I think your OODA piece has definitely resonated with one of our other participants. And from your real world example, is there any way you can use the magic of OODA to get one of our participants a PlayStation 5? Does it stretch that far?
I heard the question, already responded, Cass.
Thank you, Will. That's the speed of OODA. So some information, some feedback coming in from our participants. Thank you. The decision-making in the last year, mostly about risk mitigation. We've had that from a couple of people. Risk is obviously something that's been very prominent. Consensus and sharing more. We have spend decisions that have to follow a particular principle, a recognized player at 3P. And a really useful comment as well, taking into consideration the uncertainty element. And that is probably something that's resonated with a lot of us. Thank you very much for taking the time to share your feedback. So we're within this OODA piece. We have taken in more information. We're observing what we are preparing to do differently. We're analyzing, we're filtering, we're orientating ourselves differently. But I've got to do something different about the decide. What's going to be different going forward? Eric, can you help us out here?
Sure, Cass, thanks a lot, and good morning, everyone. So when we are talking about decide, for sure, we are realizing that triple bottom line, VUCA, and any other external events are pushing every one of us to think and act differently, and most certainly to think broadly than what we used to think. So we believe that a sharp and straightforward decision-making process is important for every decision in relation with the triple bottom line. First of all, what's important in our view is to be bold. You need to think broadly. You need to think out of the box. You need to be creative, to push beyond the boundaries. And at the end of the day, you need to make the decision and just do it. This is the way your strategy will be implemented. The second element is about being efficient. Indeed, when you take a decision, you need to go fast. And what we see is that you only need to control between 40 and 70% of the information that you need to decide. Don't go to the 100%. Don't spend too much time trying to hit the 100%, because then you will slow down the process. And finally, as decision is mostly related to people and mostly impacting people, you need to lead with tough love. Lead with tough love is about gaining trust in terms of leadership, gaining trust to your team, and earn the right to lead at the end of the day. And with the combination of these three elements, you will most certainly go to very clear decisions and gain a lot of engagement from the team to drive the transformation. Let me illustrate this through an example of a global company who recently, meaning at the COVID time, had to take very smart decisions in order to spend smarter in the area of training. They indeed realized that working from home was an opportunity for them to train and develop talents of today and the talents of tomorrow. it was pretty smart because they realized that the focus of the people were different while working from home. And even if they were working remotely, this was not a barrier to change and a barrier to transform. And as such, they decided to reshuffle completely their training plans, their training budgets. They even decided to spend more in order to identify the talents of tomorrow and in order to prepare to be ready for the future and for the post-COVID era. So they run this very, very straightforward, very bold and very engaging program. And the feedback from the participants was excellent. They even did not realize that they were trained from home, that they were trained remotely. There was a high level of engagement, and they are now sure that they are ready to hit the future challenges. But Decide is not about how to play only. Decide is about where to go. How do you want to go there? And in that respect, we believe that you need to find the right compromise between value and risk. And then you can position your strategy, you can position your organization in one of the four quadrants. The generic one being a very cost-focused, let's say traditional world, financial oriented, up to the fully integrated triple bottom line mindset with some sustainable return on invest and a drive through environmental targets. And here too, we can take the example of Anglo-American, that is a 30 billion business company. It's one of the leaders in the mining industry. They have a strong leadership position, and they used to be financially and cost-driven on the bottom left of the generic. But as many organizations, they had to face plenty of crises during the past 15 years. They realized that they could not react against this crisis. They had to face a lot of external pressure for being more responsible. And they realized that they had to reinvent themselves. And now, where they are today, they are a purpose-driven company, and they want to reimagine mining to improve people's lives. In addition, they are a founding member of Hydrogen Council, and they are strongly engaged in the energy transition strategies at the global level. Cherry on the cake, I would say, or as a result, they are reporting extremely good financial results, same as before. But on top of that, they are positioning themselves as leaders in the triple bottom line mindset, and they can move quickly to the integrated quadrant.
Thank you, Erica. I love that. A stodgy old mining company radically changing what they do and bringing in a more risk-adjusted perspective, but creating a lot of long-term value at the same time. And Anglo, of course, now a founding member of the World Hydrogen Council, as you said, and really it's a great example for us to see how these decision pieces can work with a new mindset and some new tools around that. We need to tie this into OODA by bringing it back to action, because of course we can have all the preparation with information, we can have a vision about what we want to do with it, but as we know, vision without action is a nightmare. We need to bring in this action piece, which we're going to do so in just a moment. We'll translate that vision into action, but first, time to check back in with our audience. And we have another poll for you to participate in. Let's ask, what percentage of your spend decisions add value after 2 years? Do go to the poll and vote now, please. What percentage of your spend decisions add value after 2 years? We will just give a few moments for you to input your answers. And we'll have a look. So I think we're probably ready to close the poll. Looking for a few more seconds. Interestingly, David, we're at 50% is the leading result. 40% of our participants are in that halfway marker. And then we're sort of slightly more weighted to the lower end of the spectrum. About 30% of our participants believe 25% of their decisions add value after 2 years. David, any surprises there? How do you interpret those results?
Well, actually, I am surprised, pleasantly surprised, because especially knowing some of the attendees we can be a bit of a pessimistic bunch in terms of how well are we really doing. So actually, over kind of 60% saying, yeah, more of our decisions actually impact over 2 years, which is good. So I'm pleased for the group, because actually, if you look at the statistics, and maybe this will surprise you or not, generally only 50% of decisions have an impact after 2 years, beyond just pure resource allocation. And when it comes to cost productivity programs, which we all do, only 10% of those actually show sustained results after 3 years. So generally decisions do fail, although in this group we seem to be doing better than the average, which I'm thrilled about. But why is that? And then we'll come on what we could do about it. And this word cloud here, what we're really trying to do is just pick out the context of spend decisions today and how you act. And I'm sure you recognize many of these: the budget reviews, getting the red pen out when things are not going wrong, long-term contracts, those, people that pick up phone, the nightmare people in marketing that all procurement, love to hate. That is the context of generally why decisions do fail. But how can we do things differently? How can we make this better? So let me just bring to you an example, and it's not from the business world, a different way to act. 0, the actual number is 1, but it's not quite as dramatic. It's 1 gold medal, 1 win that British cycling had in about 100 years. Okay, so to be quite honest, they may have been cycling backwards, but then that changed. And why did that change? Someone called David Brailsford, together with British Cycling, and then later with Team Sky, took them to what you would call unparalleled success for any sporting team. And just to give you some examples, there's Laura Kenny there, the most successful British female Olympian, and Chris Froome, who won 4 Tour de France. But that's not really what's important. How did they do that? That's what is important. So firstly, simple and many improvements. Probably many of you have heard about marginal gains, but really what that is in essence is to break things down and to do simple things and do many improvements. But you have to really take that into action. You have to get things done, and this is what they did. They tried, they waited for the results, found an improvement. That's how they got things done. And as you can see, that looks very similar to the OODA loop. But before I go on, let me just read you a quote from a business example. You may have heard of Amazon's bias for action. Let me just quote Jeff Bezos, who some might say is doing reasonably well. Speed matters in business. Many decisions and actions are reversible and do not need extensive study. We value calculated risk taking. A very different way to act. So let's take this forward into making spend decisions. So we've got on the left what many of us would think of as an ineffective way of making spend decisions at the moment. And on the right, fail forward fast to win. So what does that really mean? You've actually got to learn to fail, but learn with an eye to the future and do it quick. So as you can see there, many different little OODA loops that are continually turning and turning. So how do we bring this to life specifically for investment decision making? Notice I'm using the word investment, not cost. Think about taking those smaller steps. Think about starting from 0, not incrementalism, and being very innovative in terms of how you make what you choose to spend on. And there's this nice little picture here I think about it. If ultimately you want to get to having a car, generally you would build a car. But actually in the business world and in the world outside, you don't need to think like that. Think about, I can start with a skateboard, then to a scooter, then to a bike to get to a car. Have that very much that different way, those smaller steps to move forward. But then how do I do that? Think about trying to take much more frequent and quick decisions. Seek flexibility in everything you do and in your contracts, etc. And test. And then finally, the mindset. And I think probably the most important, very much think about effective learning. How do I really, when I've tested, how do I learn? I have to accept failure. That's something that comes very different to many of us, especially those of us in finance. And how ultimately do I get to greater than 50% in terms of decisions success? And I'll leave the last word to 42nd Boyd, which is at the top. To the swift goes the race.
Wow, David, that's quite a lot there. Thank you. There's such a message that you gave us, particularly in your image of British cycling, of do many simple things, be very consistent in your approach, and be persistent. Keep going, keep going, keep going, and take the learnings out of each cycle of UDA that you run. So there's a lot to appreciate in that piece. Thank you. It would be great to hear from our participants at this point. In the chat box, can we ask you to share one thing you would change tomorrow, given what you've heard today from our panelists? One thing you would change tomorrow, given what you've heard today from our panelists. Do share your thoughts in the chat box, and I'll facilitate some of those pieces of information back to the greater audience. Thank you. So we have, as a start from our feedback piece, thank you very much. We have to accept a degree of failure, take a decision and move fast, taking smaller steps instead of one big step, keep going, keep learning, act based on a percentage of the data, embrace an UDA or an agile mindset. We're going to base our decisions on 40% of the data. Think more of others. There's another element of our triple bottom line, people, planet, profits coming through, but definitely emphasis on the people and the planet. Be bold. Eric, that's resonating with your piece to us. And another participant who'd said they will focus more on the small steps than the perfect end state. They would accept failure better. And that indeed involves a degree of creativity, building some tolerance to failures. So I think there's a lot that seems to be resonating with our audience based on some of the pieces we've unpacked for UDA. Thank you all very much for sharing. Again, Q&A coming up in just a moment, but David, there's been quite a lot we've gone through this morning. Bring it home for us. Give us a summary we can take away and share broadly within our organizations.
Yeah, thank you, Cass. So at the center, we have that UDA loop. But when it comes to spend smarter, really think about investments. Don't think about costs. And then we've got to go through those different steps of the UDA loop, starting with observe. Think of that triple bottom line. How do I think broadly? How do I harness that diversity that Charlotte talked about? Then when it comes to orient, how do I analyze? How do I interpret? How do I gain insights? Look through that different lens. That rainbow lens, as Fedi described, and really all the way from the strategy down to the day-to-day, where really a lot of decisions are made. And then when it comes to decide, as Eric said, be bold, think 40 to 70. You don't need to think 80 to 90 and act with tough love. So you can move to that top right-hand corner where it's more integrated and sustainable. And then finally act. Fail forward fast. Don't be frightened of failing, but failing with the future in mind, but doing it quickly, turning that circle, many UDA loops to ultimately try and get better than that 50%.
Thank you, David. There's a question that's just come up into the Q&A from one of our participants. How do I know my team is ready to change their thinking on spend? But I can answer that one because I know, David, we've developed a spend fitness check and that we're happy to share that with our participants afterwards. So we'll reach out and share that. So I guess this spend fitness check is really a positioning. It gives us an idea of how we might be doing against UDA and how we might play from there. But that's the first of our questions. I'm sure there are other questions that have occurred to you over the course of the past hour with us. We have gone through this OODA loop to try and challenge our thinking into how we're going to think and act differently when it comes to spend as one of the main levers for driving that sustainable and inclusive total shareholder returns. At this point, I'd like to ask who has the first question, please. If you'd like to drop your questions into the Q&A box or use the chat if you prefer, and I'll facilitate that back to our panelists. Thank you. So I have a question that's come in the day-to-day with the level of pressure from shareholders, something we can all relate to. How do we convince management to do like Mars and accept to reduce the profitability element? Fede, since you brought us the Mars example, perhaps you have some insight to share. How would we accept to reduce the profitability element?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and I don't think it's about accepting to reduce the profitability element. It's really more about, as I mentioned, looking at reality through a different lens. So not only focusing only on profitability, but broadening your view so that you can orient yourself and analyze your data in a different way. How you convince management, it's really about changing your mental framework, your mental model. It's about realizing that reality is not anymore what it used to be, and you have to adapt to it. And so apply this prism look, this rainbow look, this different mental model to adapt and include additional elements to your decision framework.
Super, thank you very much, Fede. Excuse me, David, I have a question that I'd like to send your way. How has the pandemic impacted spend at publicly traded companies? Do you have a view on where those publicly traded companies are and what their spend profile looks like?
Yeah, I mean, I can talk to a lot of the clients that we work with, and many of them are publicly traded. I think the initial reaction was people went protective, they went defensive, and they kind of ultimately went with a red pen, so to speak, and cut because of the uncertainty of the future. But what we saw, and especially those who could almost look forward and look forward quicker, they realized that this was an opportunity and an opportunity to win in the future, and that they needed to invest to do that. And what I think that has changed is that companies are much more aware of investing and being choiceful for really where they can win and maximize their returns.
Super, thank you. Now we have a question about how important experience in working to a 40/70 data fold threshold would be. How important is experience in working to a 40/70 data threshold? I'm going to ask two of the panelists to respond to that because there might be an interesting procurement tilt from Eric. But Will, perhaps you'd like to give us the strategy view on that first. How important do you feel experience is, please?
Thanks, Cass. And I'm actually going to cheat because I can also see another question do you have simple recommendations or tips to build agile decision-making in big organizations? And I would actually answer them both in the same way, which is, we already talked about Jeff Bezos. He has a fantastic principle, which is to think of, and this is how you use governance, like judo, to support you. Think of your decisions in two streams. 80% of decisions, frankly, don't matter that much. 20% of decisions really matter a lot. So therefore, it's to get focused on just those few decisions that matter a lot, and then focus all of the governance and, dare I say it, bureaucracy there, and therefore create the allowance for the 80% of decisions to be made very fast. And where does experience play? It's experience that will help you judge which question are you answering. Are you answering a decision with a huge implication, or are you answering a question that frankly you won't regret whatever decision you make, which is the majority.
Super, thanks, Will. So focus on what matters to get things done. Lovely. Eric, help us with this 40/70 dilemma, perhaps from a procurement and supply chain perspective. What are your thoughts?
First of all, I think it's not necessarily a dilemma. it's a framework that you need to build, and you need to feel comfortable. And in order to do so, just look at the time, at the energy that you spend trying to get the 100%. And in the area of procurement, you know, in procurement, we have, same as finance, by the way, we are fan of data. We are always looking at all the details, but what for? At the end of the day, for almost nothing. So just my recommendation is try to stay within the 40-70, learn and replicate, and learn again and replicate. Just have a type of OODA within your 40-70, and I'm sure that you will land in a 50-60 or something like that, and you will be far more effective.
So learn and replicate. It's always that emphasis on taking key learnings. Wonderful. Thank you both, Will and Eric, for helping us on that question. David, I have another question coming your way. From your perspective, how does zero-based budgeting get perceived within markets today? ZBB, how is it perceived within markets?
Cass, I thought that might be coming my way. Thank you. So, I mean, there's perception, and I think there's what's important. Some of the perception has been a little bit negative. If you look at the performance, say, of Heinz and ABB InBev, who, should I say, are the kings of ZBB, that's kind of failed them. But I think the importance of ZBB, and I don't even really think ZBB is the right term, is to move away from incrementalism and to think much more like an entrepreneur. What do I really need to spend on, and what's going to add the most value? So for me, it's much more about a mindset, and I think companies that are acting with that mindset, whether they call it ZBB or they call it something else, I don't really care, are the ones that are going to be successful in the future.
Super, thank you. There's another comment that's a reflection of quite a few things that we've seen. And Charlotte, I wonder if you'd like to field this one, because you had a wonderful piece earlier with diversity and inclusion, taking in all that data at the beginning of this process. And I guess that involves a big involvement as far as stakeholders are concerned. Any tips on how to bring stakeholders more into this initial starting point in OODA?
Thank you, Cassie. It's an interesting question, and what is really important here, I think, is to understand the value about having a diverse team.
So start with the basics, and it builds up from there.
Someone says you should do it. But the other part is you really need to understand the benefit, that you will get quicker to a decision because you will get quicker to the critical elements, and you will improve your communication. It's really to understand the value of having a diverse team, an inclusive team.
Wonderful. So that's really helpful. Thank you. It's building that understanding, build the understanding to get the buy-in, and then move everyone through and keep that engagement going. That's something that we can certainly take away from that there. Who has the next question, please? We have time for one or two more. If you would like to drop your questions in either the chat box or the Q&A. I know our panelists are happy to take a few more questions. There's certainly some things that seem to have resonated from each of these pieces, these elements of OODA, looking at the chat and the feedback we've received. So thank you all to our participants for sharing your thoughts and comments and observations. So I think we are happy with questions. Here's another one we've definitely time for. What if the OODAs conflict? What if the OODAs conflict? In other words, the final OODA versus the professional. I hope I've understood that question correctly. But if we have some conflicting elements, particularly when we're thinking with the procurement hat on, if we have some conflicting elements within OODA, any tips and advice for dealing with that procurement versus finance, if they see things differently? And we do see that in the real world. Sometimes Procurement has one version of truth, finance has another, and we have a bit of a mismatch. I'm going to ask Eric and then David, as the respective procurement finance people, how would you offer a tip to handling conflict within an OODA piece from a procurement and a finance side? Eric, you first, please.
I think that at the end of the day, there's no conflict, because what will make the decision or what will make the consistency between procurement and finance are the results versus the objectives and the data. So what we see, and we see quite often some silos between finance and procurement, but at the end of the day, the most powerful organizations are those where finance and procurement are working together in a fully integrated model. And at the end of the day, when doing so, the source of truth is a unique source of truth.
One source of truth. David, how do you respond to that?
I think I would just really build on what Eric has said, and for me, it's really just about understanding each other. Ultimately, finance procurement may at times come from slightly different places, but still want to get to the same place, to the same vision. And it's just being able to understand each other and being able to honestly sit down and work through those things. I think it's really as simple as that.
Really as simple as that. I like simple things. Thank you very much indeed. I'd like to thank all of our participants today. I would like to thank you for the insights you've shared with us in the polls, the chat, the questions. Thank you to our panelists for helping to unpack OODA as a tool to think and act differently when it comes to spend. We will, of course, share a short summary of today with you for you to digest further at home and for you to share broadly within your teams and to start having those challenging conversations. Thank you, stay safe, and we look forward to welcoming you again in our next webinar in this series. Good day.